Have you ever paused to consider the significance of the Russian Revolution in the grand tapestry of world history? Imagine the early 20th century, a time of tension, unrest, and explosive change. Russia, a vast empire under the rule of the Tsars, was a boiling pot of socio-political upheaval. The country was on the brink of a revolution that would not only redefine its own destiny, but also leave an indelible mark on the course of global history. This was a time when the voices of the peasants echoed in the halls of power, when the industrial workers dared to challenge the status quo, and when the winds of change swept across the war-torn front lines. It was a period of transformation, of chaos, and of unprecedented change. And at the heart of it all was the Russian Revolution, a seismic shift that would shatter centuries of imperial rule. Dive with us into the tumultuous world of early 20th century Russia, as we explore the Russian Revolution, the end of an era, and the birth of a new order. The seeds of revolution, however, were not sown overnight. The Russian Revolution was the culmination of brewing discontent and hardship that had been festering for decades. To truly understand the roots of this momentous event, we need to delve into the socio-political and economic conditions of early 20th century Russia. At the turn of the century, Russia was a vast empire under the autocratic rule of Tsar Nicholas II. The majority of its population were peasants living in abject poverty, bound to the land by feudal obligations. The Industrial Revolution, which had brought prosperity to Western Europe, was slow to reach Russia. The few factories that did exist were filled with workers forced to endure long hours in harsh conditions for meager wages. The gap between the rich and the poor was stark. The opulence of the royal court stood in stark contrast to the squalor of the slums. The ruling elite lived in luxury, while the masses struggled for survival. This glaring inequality, coupled with the Tsar's autocratic rule, fueled resentment among the people. As if these conditions weren't volatile enough, World War I threw gasoline on the fire. Russia entered the war unprepared, its poorly equipped and ill-trained army suffering massive losses. The war effort put further strain on Russia's already fragile economy. Food and fuel shortages became commonplace, leading to skyrocketing prices. The war also exposed the incompetence of the Tsar's leadership. His decision to take personal command of the army was disastrous, leading to devastating defeats that only served to deepen public disillusionment with the monarchy. Meanwhile, back home, the Tsarina Alexandra, under the influence of the mystic Rasputin, was making a series of unpopular decisions that further alienated the people. The stage was set for a revolution. Discontent among the Russian peasantry and industrial workers had reached boiling point. They were hungry, frustrated, and ready for change. The cries for bread and peace grew louder, echoing through the factories, fields, and front lines. With the stage set, the curtains were ready to rise on the February Revolution. The month of February 1917 marked a seismic shift in Russian history. The cold winter of February was far from ordinary. The city of Petrograd, today's St. Petersburg, was gripped by a wave of mass protests and strikes. The people, exhausted by war and economic hardship, were on the brink of revolt. The city's factories, its bread queues, and its icy streets became the staging ground for a revolution that would change the course of history. Tsar Nicholas II, the last emperor of Russia, was faced with an unprecedented crisis. His rule, built on centuries of autocracy, was being challenged by the very people he was meant to govern. As the protests escalated, the Tsar was left with no choice but to abdicate, marking the end of more than 300 years of Romanov rule. It was a moment that symbolized the end of an era and the beginning of a new chapter in Russian history. In the wake of the Tsar's abdication, a power vacuum emerged. Two bodies stepped in to fill the void: the Provisional Government and the Petrograd Soviet. The Provisional Government, consisting of former members of the Duma, Russia's legislative body, aimed to establish a democratic government and maintain Russia's involvement in World War I. The Petrograd Soviet, on the other hand, was a council of workers and soldiers' deputies. It represented the interests of the lower classes and advocated for an immediate end to the war. This dual power structure created a tense and volatile political climate. Russia was teetering on the edge, caught between the promise of democracy and the allure of radical change. The February Revolution was a watershed moment, a spark that lit the fuse of further upheaval. It was a testament to the power of the people, a reminder of what can happen when the voices of the many drown out the commands of the few. But as monumental as these events were, they were only the beginning. The stage was set for an even greater shift, one that would shake Russia to its very core. But the February Revolution was just the beginning. The October Revolution was the moment the world had been waiting for. The stage was set for a seismic shift in Russia's political landscape. It was October 1917, and the Bolsheviks, under the leadership of Vladimir Lenin, were ready to seize power. Lenin had returned from exile earlier that year, in April, under the very noses of the Provisional Government. His arrival sparked a new fervor among his followers, the Bolsheviks, who were growing in number and influence. Lenin's rallying cry, "Peace, land, bread," resonated deeply with a nation weary of war and economic struggle. He promised an end to Russia's involvement in World War I, land for the peasants and food for all. The people listened, and they were ready for change. Meanwhile, the Provisional Government was faltering. It had continued Russia's involvement in the war, leading to further loss of life and resources. Discontent was growing, and the Bolsheviks were ready to exploit it. The night of October 25th, in the Julian calendar, then in use in Russia, saw the dramatic storming of the Winter Palace in Petrograd, the seat of the Provisional Government. With a force of Red Guards, soldiers and sailors, the Bolsheviks took control. It was a bloodless coup, with the Provisional Government surrendering without a fight. The October Revolution had begun. In the days that followed, the Bolsheviks moved swiftly to consolidate their power. They issued a series of decrees, including the Decree on Peace, which took Russia out of the war, and the Decree on Land, which redistributed land among the peasants. The Bolsheviks were delivering on their promises, and in doing so, they were reshaping Russia's political, economic, and social landscape. The October Revolution marked the end of centuries of Tsarist rule and the beginning of a new era. It was a period of radical change marked by hope, fear, and uncertainty. The Bolsheviks had seized power, but they were not unchallenged. They faced opposition from within Russia and from abroad. The October Revolution had succeeded, but the battle for control was far from over. The Russian Revolution was not a single event, but a series of battles. It was a domino effect, where the fall of one regime led to the rise of another, and the struggle for power didn't end with the Bolshevik takeover. The aftermath of the October Revolution plunged the nation into a civil war, a brutal struggle between the Red Army, loyal to the Bolshevik government, and the White Army, a coalition of anti-Bolshevik forces. The Red Army, led by Leon Trotsky, was comprised largely of the industrial working class and peasantry. On the other side, the White Army was a diverse coalition of monarchists, capitalists, and socialists, united in their opposition to the Bolsheviks. The lines were drawn, and the stage was set for a catastrophic battle that would claim millions of lives. The Civil War raged on from 1918 to 1922, with the Red Army gaining the upper hand due to their superior organization and unity of purpose. The White Army, despite receiving support from foreign powers like the United States, United Kingdom, and France, were plagued by internal divisions and lack of coordination. This devastating war saw the country torn apart by violence, chaos, and famine. It was in this crucible of conflict that the Bolsheviks consolidated their power, implementing policies of war communism, taking control of industries, and requisitioning grain from peasants, all in the name of defending the revolution. Finally, in 1922, the Bolsheviks emerged victorious. The Civil War had left the country in ruins, but it had also paved the way for the creation of a new political entity. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, better known as the USSR, was established. The USSR brought together diverse ethnic and linguistic groups under one central government, led by the Communist Party. The establishment of the USSR marked the end of the Civil War and the beginning of a new era in Russian history. It was a country forged in the fires of revolution and civil war, a bold experiment in socialism on a scale never before seen. And so the USSR was born, a testament to the power and legacy of the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution, though a century old, continues to reverberate across time. It left an indelible imprint not only on Russia, but on the world stage. The revolution brought an end to centuries of imperial rule, replacing it with a communist regime that would last for more than 70 years. It altered the social fabric, uprooting the old order and instilling a new one that centered on the proletariat. The revolution's influence extended beyond Russia's borders, sparking a global ideological battle between capitalism and communism that defined the 20th century. It played a pivotal role in shaping geopolitical alliances and conflicts, including the Cold War. It inspired revolutions and resistance movements worldwide, underscoring the power of collective action in effecting change. As we reflect on the Russian Revolution, we are reminded of its enduring legacy, a monumental change that reshaped the world as we know it today. What do you think was the most significant impact of the Russian Revolution? Share your thoughts below.